is the very real prospect of a new world order. The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests. He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial. How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time when I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear. Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show? My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something. We both took the same ball. You know, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I know we both were being an expiration date on that. He is the free American, Clay Douglas. That's the Free American, weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger will inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon down, the sky and stop the sun. For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8631.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another week of the Free American. I'm your host, I am Clay Douglas. My guest today is Keith Broaders of the Constitution Club. And I've got one of his articles featured up here on my website, Give Me Liberty or Give Me Debt. Hello, Keith. How are you?
Good morning, Clayton. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Well, it's my pleasure, sir. You are doing a lot. You know, I try to have people on this show that are actually doing something, not just whining, not just complaining about the way things are, but coming up with some solutions, coming up with actions. You know, I just don't believe that we are as helpless as they would like for you to believe we are. I believe we got more control. You know, there's never been a time in history when it's been easy to be free, has it?
No, I think not. I think there's a price to pay for everything, you know, and one of the things that our founding fathers told us that in order to preserve this experiment in self-government, it would require eternal vigilance. And frankly, the American people, for the most part, have been very apathetic. Couple that with their ignorance, and what you have then essentially is the situation that we have today.
Well, you mentioned a debt here. Now, bear with me here. I've got another station to bring up, so you may hear a dial tone or something like that until we get connected here. But I'm still busy, so we won't bring that up yet. But, you know, you mentioned a debt, and our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson being my favorite, he told us if you ever allow a private bank to issue your money, the banks and the corporations that spring up around them will leave your children homeless in the land that we conquered. Sound like he was warning us about fascism 200 and some odd years ago.
Well, I agree with you. I think that Thomas Jefferson's quotations are among the finest quotations that really reveal where we are today. I think if we would have listened to the words of warning by our founding fathers, we would certainly be in a lot better position than we are. But on the subject of debt, first off, one of the things that I'd like to mention is that I'm a real fan of the Constitution, but I think that there were some serious problems with the Constitution when it was written, and I think one of the reasons it had problems was because one of the founding fathers had a tremendous influence on his brethren. His name was Alexander Hamilton. And I think Hamilton was probably the smartest. He probably was smarter, but unfortunately he was also diabolical, because what Alexander Hamilton did was I think he was the one who was responsible for this glaring mistake in the Constitution. In the very beginning, Article 1, Section 1, I think it's Clause 2, the Founding Fathers put into the Constitution a clause that basically said that the government would have the power to tax or levy taxes and also to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Now, right off the bat, that seems reasonable. But if you go to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, it says Congress shall have the power to coin money and to regulate the value thereof. In other words, Congress has the exclusive authority to issue the money. Well, if Congress has the power to create money, then why would there be any necessity to borrow money? I mean, that is absurd. There had to be a reason, a diabolical reason, that Congress was granted the power to borrow money. Well, you borrow money to get into debt. And when you get into debt, you become the servant to the lender. And Alexander Hamilton's relationship with Great Britain was such that he wanted, frankly, to create a second British Empire here in America. He wanted to create a very strong central government, and one of the best ways to control the people was to get them all into debt. And I believe that King George, after 7 years of fighting, I think King George and the British finally grew weary of fighting this expensive war against the colonies, and they decided that, rather than owning the colonies, if we could just control the colonies, it would work out a lot better, because we're not going to be able to defeat these guys militarily, so maybe the only way that we can control them is to plunge them into debt. And so the British at that point in time decided, well, we need to start figuring out how can we plunge them into debt. Well, let's send in our bankers, let's send in our lawyers, let's find politicians that can be bought, and in the process we will be able to recapture the colonies, but we will give them the illusion that they're free while controlling them monetarily.
Yeah, I've told people a number of times that they've really refined the art of slavery to the point the slave don't know they're slaves.
Well, Goethe, the German philosopher, said the most helpless of all slaves is the man who falsely believes that he is free. And I think that the problem that we have today is that the schools and the media have perpetrated an illusion. We think we're free, and because we think we're free, we're much easier to control, and frankly, we're much more productive. And when the slaves of the 19th century were emancipated, everybody says, oh, well, the African American slaves were granted their freedom. Well, no, what really happened was their ownership was transferred from the southern plantations to the government. The government became essentially the owner of the plantation, and not only did the blacks, but everyone else under the 14th Amendment became a slave to the central government.
Matter of fact, one of the things that I'm working on now, I've got a new picture up on my website of with the Confederate flag behind me, and it wasn't a civil war; it was Lincoln's War, and it was a war on self-sufficiency. It was a war on the farmers. It was a war on the ranchers. It was a war on the plantation owners. They didn't want us to be able to feed ourselves, and it wasn't about slavery at all.
Well, actually, as far as I'm concerned, the war initiated I mean, you can't take slavery completely out of the equation. However, the actual war was essentially a second war for American independence. It essentially was over money. I mean, frankly, every war is about power and about money. It always has been that way, and it probably always will be. The northern states represented about 70% of the population in the colonies or in the states. The southern states represented about 30%. Now, 30% of the people were paying 80% of the taxes. And that's kind of called taxation without representation. That is basically why the South fought back, was because of the fact that they represented a small percentage of the people, but they were paying the lion's share of the taxes, and this was due to what was known as the moral tariff. And when asked, one time Lincoln was asked, well, why don't you just let them go in peace? And he said, well, if we do that, who's going to pay the taxes? Who's going to pay for the government?
And of course, one of the reasons possibly that Lincoln was assassinated was that he stopped borrowing money from the bankers and issued greenbacks to fight a war that wasn't right in the first place.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think that the one huge mistake that the South made was not to abolish slavery, because when Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he basically locked France and England out of the war. I believe that most of the countries in Europe favored the South because they wanted to see the United States broken up into two different units, which would have diminished the power and the strength of their opposition here in the Americas. And I think that when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, both France and England knew that politically it would be devastating if they were to join the fight with the South against the North. And so I think that if the South had voluntarily indicated they were going to abolish slavery, and they might, even if they just made the statement, we're going to abolish slavery in 3 years or 5 years or whatever, I think that would have allowed them to be able to get more support from other countries, which would have made the war, which would have made the victory much more possible, much more likely.
Well, the oldest maxim in warfare, Keith, is divide and conquer. And I believe that's exactly what we're seeing today, even in our political parties. Oh, I'm a Republican. Well, you're a Democrat. Oh, you're a conservative. Well, I'm a liberal. That's all bull. You know, we're Americans.
Well, you're exactly right, and I think that, frankly, one of the things that we need to be very careful of in the patriot community is we need to realize that there are certain things that are going to be, certain issues that are going to be put on the table for discussion that are not going to unite the patriots, are going to divide us, and we need to be very cautious. We need to remember that the enemy that we have, frankly, is Congress. Congress is enemy number one. As far as I'm concerned, Congress is much more dangerous to our liberty than any foreign nation. And I think that we need to be careful, because the powers behind the scenes are doing everything in their power to keep us from recognizing our enemies. Sun Tzu, who was the author of the book The Art of War, once said that in order to win a war, the first thing you need to know is you need to know who your enemy is. And I think one of the reasons that the enemy has been so successful in continuing to perpetrate the fraud is because most of the American people have no idea who is responsible for the problems that we have. Congress keeps passing legislations that diminish our liberty. They continue to pass laws that increase the size and scope of our federal government with rules, regulations, codes, ordinances, statutes, and all sorts of other intrusions into our personal liberties. And they've created these problems, and then we turn right around and re-elect the same people to solve the problems who created the problems in the first place. And this is absolutely absurd. And I think that we, the people, need to wake up and take personal responsibility for the problems that we have. I think the solution is really quite simple. We need to focus on the target. We've got to stop quibbling and quarreling and fighting amongst ourselves over issues and go to the source and fight the problem. We need to, frankly, declare war on Congress, because they are the enemy. They have the solutions. If they would just simply follow the Constitution. Barack Obama gets too much credit and he gets too much blame because, frankly, the power is with Congress. power is with the people. Congress is supposed to be the representatives of the people, but what they've become is they've become the representatives or the agents of the bankers and the financial elite. We elect them, but they take their marching orders from the cartel of international bankers and financial institutions.
You know, it's interesting. We abolished a few other things that might have been beneficial for us. For instance, Hamilton was killed by Aaron Burr in a duel. He challenged him and shot the son of a bitch, and we just can't do that today because the laws don't allow us to. But I've told people that the elite, the banksters, they don't really have the power they want you to believe they have. But they got tremendous power because they control the press. They control the media. The Rothschilds banking conglomerate bought Reuters back in the 1800s, at the end of the 1800s. They've taken over control of our television, of our radio, everything else. Clear Channel is, you don't hear this kind of talk, this kind of information on Clear Channel. And I said, well, if they had the power they had, we'd still be under the Roman Empire or the Assyrian Empire or the English Empire, and we may still be under the empire on which the sun never sets, because the bankers, the Rothschilds, they're part of the problem. They finance both sides. It's what they've always done. Jacob Schiff, New York banker, allied with the Rothschilds, allied with the Federal Reserve, financed Marx and Lenin to go over and create communism. And I've said that we went through almost 50 years of a Cold War. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. Keith, I don't believe the Russians ever been our enemy. They've been our friends forever.
Well, going back to the Civil War, the nation that was most supportive of the South was, in fact, Russia. Russia did not want to. During the time of the Civil War, Russia did not have a central bank. All of the other nations did. So Russia was kind of was on the outs with the Rothschilds, and Russia did not want to see they did not want to support the national bank. I mean the national bank and the world banking cartels. One thing I want to mention about Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, I think frankly that if Alexander Hamilton had been assassinated 20 years earlier by Aaron Burr should have a national holiday proclaimed in his name. I think that Alexander Hamilton was basically, the father of the American empire. He was the father of the corporate democracy that we have today. Benito Mussolini was, by the way, I think one of the things that we need to realize too is that the Supreme Court is not the highest court in the land, contrary to what everybody thinks. The fact of the matter is the highest court in the land is the court of public opinion. Benito Mussolini in Italy was never convicted in a court of law, but he was convicted in the court of public opinion, and he paid the dear price. And I think we here in America need to realize the fact that we, the people, are the ultimate judge and jury. We are the one who determines what is law and what is not. Whoever is the sovereign has that authority, and we were intended to be the sovereign from the beginning. However, the international bankers have used the tax dollars that they've collected to essentially enslave us by creating a system whereby which they fund the election of candidates. Then the candidates basically pay the bankers back by passing the legislation that is introduced by the lawyers that the bankers employ to write the laws. So we have a situation where the bankers are writing the laws, and the agents of the bankers are voting on the laws, and the president, who they control, signs the bill into law, and then the kangaroo court called the Supreme Court uses an implied power, which was another one of the great legacies of Alexander Hamilton. The fact of the matter is that when most of the founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution and sent it on to the states, their thought was that any permission that we don't give to the government is not permitted. You can't do it. It's anything that we don't spell out in Article 1, Section 8 is prohibited. This is basically known as the principle of delegated powers. And Alexander Hamilton came up with this great idea. He said, well, if we're going to create a strong central government, we need to have more liberty to be able to expand the size of government without having to follow this thing called the Constitution. And so Alexander Hamilton essentially invented a concept called implied powers. And so he basically said that we have the power to do anything in Congress that we think is necessary and proper. Well, this is absolute nonsense, because if you basically have the capacity to be able to do whatever you think is necessary and proper, then you might as well not even have a constitution.
Now, currently today, and this last week, I had some gentlemen on my show that talked about grand juries, common law grand juries, and everything we got, all of our enemies are controlled by Congress. The FBI, the CIA is all financed to go out and, conduct wars with people we have no reason to be at war at. I mean, that's true of Vietnam, it's true of Iraq, and certainly true of Afghanistan. I mean, those nasty old Taliban were simply destroying the opium poppy crops, so they had to be taken out. Now we got troops guarding the opium poppy crops. And the American people are more drugged today than the Chinese were during the Boxer Rebellion, when they shipped all the opium into China to take over that, create a communist type of country. And we got, I say the television, they don't call it programming for nothing. And I tried to do things by the book. I worked with a presidential candidate in 1996 by the name of Charles Collins, and most Americans never heard of Charles Collins, although he was the first Republican to sign up for the presidential race. And every time he got up on stage, every cameraman from CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN turned their cameras off and pointed them at the ground. So no Americans ever knew Charles Collins wanted to abolish the Fed the same way Kennedy did with Executive Order 11110.
Well, the other thing that we obviously we need to educate people, because frankly we are all victims of an education system which was designed to indoctrinate, and it has been very successful. I think if you take a look at what schools are actually accomplishing, is they're basically created to teach the young people that obedience is the most important thing that they can be.
In other words, indoctrinate rather than educate.
That's precisely it. And they also want to teach the young people that solutions to problems need to be addressed by bureaucrats and by intellectual elite. They believe that essentially that we the people were not capable of knowing what is best for us, so we needed to have a big brother who could come in and take care of us. And so schools did two things. They wanted to teach the kids to obey, and they wanted to teach the kids that the government officials could be trusted. This is exactly the same agenda that was responsible for what happened in Nazi Germany. The Prussians during the Napoleonic Wars were defeated, and their government got together at the conclusion of the war and said, we've got to come up with a new system to be able to make sure that we never get taken out again. And so we need to create a system whereby which we can train the young men to become ferocious fighters that will be basically willing to die for their country. So they decided that what they were going to do was they were going to create something called public schools, and these public schools essentially would be military academies where the children they wouldn't learn necessarily military tactics or anything, but they would learn to become obedient lapdogs. They would be taught to obey at all costs. They would be taught that to die for their country was a great honor. And this system of public education, which was initiated in Prussia in the early 1800s, was essentially the model that was used by Horace Mann when he established this American system of education. And so basically, our educational system, it does not teach kids how to think. They teach kids what to think. They teach conformity rather than creativity. They reward students for being obedient, and they punish students for having the audacity to question authority.
Let me point out that up on my website I've got links to a couple of things. One's called the Little Red Schoolhouse, and the other is Timothy Bible College. And both of these organizations were created by my friend Dr. Jake Wade. I helped him start Little Red Schoolhouse over 20 years ago. And you can actually get the truth through that. You can get your education through that. And if you sent your kids from the safety of your living room to the Little Red Schoolhouse to get his high school diploma, you wouldn't have to worry about Columbines or Sandy Hooks or Wacos. And if you want to, I'm working on my master's degree right now in political science and on divinity in Timothy Bible College. He's graduated hundreds of students from there. We've worked with counties. You got kids that have dropped out of school. Here's a way to bring them back. Here's a way to educate them. And you do it on biblical values on which our Constitution was, and at least our Bill of Rights was based.
Well, I think that going back to your thing about the grand jury, I think the thing that we need to recognize is the fact that the ultimate, again, we the people are the ultimate arbiter of the Constitution. We are the ultimate judge. And so in America today, we have essentially an unofficial grand jury of all of the people. And frankly, all of the people, while I refer to the government that we have today as a de facto government. In other words, it's basically not a legitimate government, but it is a constructed government. It's basically based upon the principles that Mussolini supported, and that is the merger of corporations and the government. When those two entities come together, they create a monopoly on power. And again, the people of Italy finally were fed up with him, and they basically convened a court of public opinion, or the grand jury, and they essentially took him out. And I think that what we need to do in this country is we cannot use the grand juries that exist in our country today, because they are run by the Bar Association. They are controlled by the Bar Association, which is basically nothing more than a fraternity of foreign agents representing the Crown. And so, in order for us to be able to have any real effect, if we go out and we get all kinds of evidence that a particular elected official has committed crimes, if we submit this to the grand juries, first off, the district attorney, who is a member of the bar, they will not deal with it. They will ignore it, and they will just shine it off. And so we cannot essentially get indictments and potential prosecutions in the grand juries that exist today. So a lot of people have been talking about setting up grand juries, private grand juries of the American people. The problem is that anything that those organizations do, any of their findings and will basically not be accepted. And so the thing we have to realize is that we still have the right to come together as a people and to be able to publicize that the emperor has no clothes. We have the ability to essentially convict our local officials of their crimes by shedding the light on them. One of the best ways to get rid of cockroaches is to turn on the light, and one of the best ways, obviously, to get rid of corrupt politicians. We can't expect the courts to really help us, because the courts are not part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. They're a big part of the problem. And so in order to, so we have the right to do this. In fact, in Article 10 of the Bill of Rights, it basically says that any power basically granted, any power that is not granted to the United States or prohibited to the states is reserved to the states and to the people respectively, what they're basically saying is that the states can do anything they want as long as they're not prohibited from doing it, and as long as it's something that that the people in the state particularly want. And so if the people want to have a grand jury, there's nothing that basically precludes them from being able to do it. The Constitution does not prohibit it, and so we basically have these rights. And of course, in the Ninth Amendment, it basically says is that we have a lot of rights that are not spelled out in the Constitution. We have the right to eat, and we have the right to sleep and drink and to laugh and to run, but these are not spelled out. And so the Ninth and Tenth Amendment are two amendments that are just really crucial, and that we need to recognize that most of us unfortunately do not.
Well, the common law grand juries, basically, they say they need about 25 people per state, and they will not go through the so-called court systems, because you're absolutely right on that. We fought the War of 1812 to get rid of the 13th Amendment that barred titles of nobility or lawyers from even holding public office. What they have done with that, by burying that 13th Amendment under the guise of slavery, setting the slaves free, they abolished all of the separation between the executive, the judicial, and the congressional branches of government. We got lawyers in all of them, and they work for the British accredited registry. No state's licensed a lawyer, and I've got the right to practice law as you do. We if we hire a lawyer, that means we're mentally defective in the court's eyes.
One of the things that I want to mention, I think that most of us don't realize, is that there's a difference between an attorney and a lawyer. A lawyer is not the bad guy, frankly. The bad guy is the attorney, because an attorney has an affiliation with the bar. He basically is subject to the jurisdiction of the Bar Association. A lawyer is not necessarily a member of, in fact, is not a member of the bar. So, frankly, lawyers are not necessarily the bad guys. Now, when the 13th Amendment, the original 13th Amendment, was introduced in 1810 by Philip Reed, I believe, of North or South Carolina, the House of Representatives in this country consisted of, I guess it was somewhere around 100 members or something like that. In fact, I think that's what it was. And at that time, of the 100 members of the House of Representatives, the vast majority of them were, in fact, lawyers. These lawyers would not have passed a proposed amendment to the Constitution that would have banned themselves from serving. What they wanted is they wanted to ban the foreign agents. They wanted to make sure that people who had loyalty to the United States would be able to serve in Congress, that they did not want individuals who had an allegiance to a foreign power to be able to infiltrate our government and take it over. And so it was essentially the members of the Bar Association that they were after, or the people who had an affiliation or a link to the British government. As a matter of fact, virtually every president, from John Quincy Adams up to Abraham Lincoln, virtually every president, with the exception of William Henry Harrison and Zachary Taylor, I believe, virtually every other president was, in fact, a lawyer. And so lawyers were not the enemy. It was the foreign agents that were the enemy.
You mean kind of like dual citizens today, people that are running our homeland security that owe their loyalty to Israel, the criminal state of Israel, rather than the United States or the people here?
Well, they have a divided loyalty. Even the, I don't even. Somebody sent me a blog or a comment on one of my blogs the other day, and I think it's true. I'm going to stop referring to Barack Obama with any degree of respect. He is not our president. He is the imposter in chief, and I think that we need to call it as it is. He is not our president. He is a CEO hired by the banking cartels to basically deceive the American people and to lead us down the path to our own destruction. And, let me read this little short. This is a example of the types of writings that I put together. These are relatively short blogs. This one is called The Court of Public Opinion. Benito Mussolini was never found guilty in a court of law, but he found guilty in the court of public opinion. There are two courts operating side by side in today. The first one is the one that is used anchors to exploit the people. This court derives its power from the collective willingness of the public to submit to their jurisdiction. The bankers' courts will continue to rule and reign as long as the people give their tacit consent. When a sufficient number of people become aware of the fact that the judicial system is being manipulated, the international institutions begin to their disapproval and refuse to comply with unjust laws. The key to the restoration of the rule of law in the country is the collective will of the people to comply with unjust laws. Our silence allows the financial institutions to make money, make a mockery of our judicial system. They have made it impossible to receive any common law justice in their equity courts. The fraudulent judicial system is like the proverbial house of cards that will come crashing down as soon as the American people convict the judicial system of the fraud in the court of public opinion. The courts were created by the consent of the governed, and we have the power to end this reign of terror by withdrawing our consent. The courts were created to protect the lives, liberty, and property of the people, but have become the tools in the hands of the bankers to make us debt slaves in a land that once was free. Contrary to what we have been told, the Supreme Court is not the highest court in the land. We must count, the most, I've just found an error here. The court with the ultimate authority in the land is the court of public opinion. The law is what we the people say that it is, and no body of corrupt lawyers have the power to trump the will and the voice of the people. So anyway, that's just a little sample of the types of content that I'm putting forth in this book that I'm prepared to write. It's going to be a collection of about 120 or 130 different short blogs that explain the nature of our problem and also the potential solutions. And hopefully sometime later this year, maybe in the late spring or early summer, I'll have it ready for publication. It's going to be called Give Me Liberty or Give Me Debt. One of the things that I think is really important that I want to talk about, which I think is the very root of the problem, Henry David Thoreau was once quoted as having said that there are 1,000 men who there are 1,000 men who hack at the branches of evil for every one who strikes at the root. And I think in order to solve our problems, we need to identify the enemy and we need to identify the problems that need to be attacked. And the monetary system, I think, is the biggest problem that we have, because he who controls the issuance of the money controls the nation and controls the people. Rothschild, back in the time of the War of 1812, basically said that he was going to punish the United States if they did not recharter the Bank of the United States. He basically indicated that they would experience a dreadful war, a very costly war, and he was very prophetic, because essentially the War of 1812 was a war between the United States and the bankers of England. So anyway, that's I think the real problem that we have is a monetary nature. If you really stop for just a minute, let's talk about money. What is money? In my opinion, what money is a token that is used to exchange, to be able to participate in commerce. Essentially, the most basic of all forms of exchange was the system of barter, where I would trade my corn essentially for your apple, and we would make a swap, and that would be done. And we didn't need a banking system. We didn't need a parasitic middleman to be able to engage in commerce. Well, as time went by, and as more and more people got involved, it was necessary to be able to come up with a token that could be used in commerce, so that people could, who had corn, who wanted to trade it for something other, say, than apples, they needed to have some sort of a token that they could use so that they could basically purchase anything that they wanted. So money is a token of value. It's a token of wealth. And whoever has the power to create these tokens is the power source. As individuals, in order for us to be free and sovereign, we have to have the ability to create our own money. And money should be backed. I don't believe money should be backed by gold or silver. I think money should be backed essentially by the productive labor of the people. Today, our monetary system basically creates, or the bankers have created a monetary system whereby which money is issued and created out of debt. It is created out of a debt obligation or an IOU. A Federal Reserve note doesn't represent money, it represents an IOU. And this system of having debt-based currency is the source of the problem, because of the fact that it creates an opportunity for the parasitic middlemen to step in and basically control the wealth and the people of a nation. And so in order to restore honest money, we've got to banish bankers from their existence. I think if you go back, like you said earlier, to the Bible, it basically said that the love of money is the root of all evil, and who loves money more than the bankers?
You know, I've said that there's no such thing as the New World Order. The money changers Jesus ran out of the temple are still with us. They just changed the name of the temple. They call it the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England or the International Monetary Fund now.
Well, I think one of the people who I've become a real fan of is Walter Burien from Arizona. Walter essentially blew the whistle on something known as the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports. And, you know, everybody talks about how America is in debt and we have this tremendous national debt and everything. And the fact of the matter is that the bankers have created a system whereby which the accounting done by our government is as fraudulent as everything else. When we have a budget, and we haven't had one for quite some time, but when we have a federal budget, it basically indicates how much money the government is willing to allocate to run the business of government. Now, the amount of money that they allocate tends to be exactly the same as the amount of money that they generate in revenue from the collection of taxes. We collected about a little less than $3 trillion in income taxes, corporate taxes, payroll taxes, etc., excise taxes. All of these things come together, and this is about $3 trillion raised for the government. So the government allocates about $3 trillion for the budget. Sounds reasonable, but the thing that they're not telling us is the fact that the government has assets that are invested, and that these invested assets draw interest and that they generate revenue. There was about $5 trillion of revenue generated to the government outside of the collection of taxes. So the federal government generated somewhere between $7.5 to $8 trillion was the revenue stream. But of the money that they collected, though, they only allocated $2.5 trillion to run the government. Well, what happened to the other $5 or $5.5 trillion? Where did it go? Well, it went to the Federal Reserve, which is a privately owned corporation. Well, they basically then used that to fund virtually all of the covert operations of the CIA. They basically used it to prop up dictators around the world that are willing to basically be subservient to our will. They send the money to the International Monetary Fund, the stockholders of the Federal Reserve, the Vatican. All of these are organizations that receive the money that we pay in taxes. So the CAFR essentially is the report that explains exactly where the money is. There is so much money that is being diverted out of our country to fund our enemies. In fact, there's even substantial evidence to indicate that the fact that the CIA was actually invented and created by Al-Qaeda was actually created and funded initially by the CIA.
In my book, Mystery Babylon, I document 25 years ago, I got a hold of a document written by Colonel Edward P. Catolo, and I checked it out. I checked everything out that he said, and found Corporal William Tyree, whose wife was murdered. Tyree was framed for the murder, and all of this was documented in Catolo's document to the NSA, and he said he sent his charge by the CIA. George Bush was head of the CIA. This ran because the same time as Iran-Contra, that scandal made the media, made the newspapers, but they didn't tell you about Operation Watchtower, which was building radio guide towers down in the jungles of Colombia to guide planes into Albrook Air Force Base, where George Bush's partner, Manuel Noriega, run by Mossad agent Michael Harari, brought over 100 plane loads of cocaine into Albrook Air Force Base, and the CIA and the Mossad met the planes, transferred the money, and shipped the cocaine into a nice little protected airport, one of the locations, in a place called Mena, Arkansas. And that airport was protected by, whoa, maybe it's just a coincidence, Governor Bill Clinton. Now, you know, I said my career, Keith, has spanned pissing off 4 presidents, because I blew the whistle on George Bush's drug running. I blew the whistle on the fact I sent Bill Clinton copies of Catolo's document via his aide, Stephanopoulos, and my friend William Tyree, who's doing life in Walpole Prison, laughed at me. I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean? What are you laughing about? Don't you think Clinton's got to be? Bush has got to be stopped. He's a drug dealer." He goes, "Bill Clinton ain't going to stop anything. He won't say a word about that," and he was right.
Well, Clayton, would you do us a favor here and tell us a little bit about the connection between Prescott Bush and Adolf Hitler?
His name was Sheriff, and we've got pictures of Prescott and with his son George sitting right beside some high-level Nazis. They changed his name to Bush, Prescott Bush, who was indicted with trading with the enemy. His bank was indicted for trading with the enemy. They were working with the Nazis, and keep in mind again, the Nazis were no more representative of the German people as the CIA is of us. This was the police force that they put in. This is the control they took over. They financed both sides, and they controlled it. You know.
Isn't it interesting that Henry Ford, who was awarded the Man of the Year in Nazi Germany in 1939, I believe it was. Isn't it interesting that none of his plants that he built to build trucks for the German war effort, isn't it interesting that none of Henry Ford's plants were bombed where virtually every other plant was?
Well, they as Rockefeller said, competition is a sin. So they eliminate the competition. They've done the same thing in the drug war. They went down and took out the Median cartel. They set up the Cali cartel of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. And all your drug profits are being run through Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. They're laundering the money. Nobody ever thinks a second thing about how much money is going in there into these projects. And you know how people can sit in why do you think it's okay to pay interest on that money you got in your pocket, issued by the Federal Reserve, when your government can issue the money without debt-free? So why do we even have this debt at all? It makes no sense, except that you're a slave. You're a slave, and this is the way they extort the money from you. There is no law saying we got to pay income tax. But
well, basically, the reason that we have to pay income tax is because in the Constitution it says that the government shall not interfere with the right of an individual to contract. When you fill out a 1040 form, you are entering into a contract, a binding contract, and the government cannot interfere with a private corporation like the IRS, who has, if you enter into a contract with the IRS, you essentially are volunteering to participate in their program.
That's right. We have they come right out in front and tell you, Keith. I mean, we have the most successful voluntary income tax program in the world. Well, I don't choose to volunteer. I don't fill out no W-2 forms. I don't fill out any of those things, and I don't file taxes. I'm not required to. I don't volunteer.
Well, you have to. If you enter into a contract, then you have to keep your contract. So the only way out of the system, essentially, is like you said, don't volunteer. If you don't volunteer, they have no jurisdiction over you. For example, if you're an employee of the McDonald's hamburger chain, if you're an employee, then you have to take the orders from the company. They can tell you what your hours are, how much you're going to be paid, etc. They have jurisdiction over you because you have an employer-employee relationship with them. However, we have no such relationship with the IRS unless we essentially volunteer to become part of their corporation. And so, frankly, there is no law that requires you to pay income tax. And the fact of the matter is that income is defined as the profit that a person receives from a corporate activity. Income and wages are not the same thing. Wages or any form of compensation is nothing more, essentially, than that which you get when you trade your labor for compensation. That's not a gain. That's just an example of a barter. I trade watermelons for mowing my lawn, for having someone mow my lawn. This is a trade. Watermelons aren't taxable, so why should dollars be taxable? Because all dollars are a token representing the trade that is taking place. So income is not the same thing as wages, and the taxes. If you take a look at it, in order for the government to be legitimate, the taxes cannot be direct. Well, any time the federal government collects taxes from people, it's a direct tax. The federal government essentially was supposed to make sure that all of the taxes that it collected had to be indirect and they had to be apportioned. There's only one way that you can essentially accomplish that, and that is that the federal government needs to tax the states for their proportionate share of the national budget. And then it will be up to the states to tax the people directly. But the federal government, if the federal government has the power to tax individuals, then the federal government has the power to destroy, like John Marshall said, who was a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He said, the power to tax is the power to destroy. And he was exactly right. And so a true constitutional tax cannot be levied directly upon the people. The federal government should be billing the states accordingly. If California represents, say, 15% of the people in the country, then California should pay 15% of the expenses. And those expenses should be limited to constitutionally mandated things such as defense, the general welfare, etc. But so many of the programs that are being paid for today are not things that were listed in Article 1, Section 8. There's no reason to allocate any money to the unconstitutional programs. For example, the Constitution doesn't say anything about the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the Homeland Security, the Department of Education, the National Parks. All of these things are programs which we are funding. Well, frankly, Congress should not fund any of them unless they do something very important, and that is, if they want a national parks system, then they need to basically introduce an amendment to the Constitution, basically justifying the funding of it. But if we basically just fund anything that we want without regards to the constitutionality of that, we make a whole mockery of the Constitution. Like George Bush said, the Constitution apparently is only a piece of paper.
Yeah, and what do all of the judges say? Don't bring that Constitution into my courtroom. It offends my gold fringed flag over here.
Yeah. Another guy that I think is somebody that American people need to know a little bit about is Smedley Butler. Let me turn the tables on this interview and ask you to tell us a little bit about General Smedley Butler.
Absolutely. He said, Al Capone paled by comparison to me. He ran the rackets in Chicago. I ran the rackets all over the world. I made Cuba safe for Brown Brothers and Harriman. War is a racket, and it's the soldiers which really have no position here. We were not supposed to have a standing army here. What part of the Second Amendment don't they understand? That's you and me defending this country. We could be called up by the government anytime, by the governor or the sheriff or the local sheriff. This is what the militias were supposed to be. We weren't supposed to have a standing army. I volunteered for Vietnam in 1964 because I was a victim of the propaganda on television. Not the public fool system. I dropped out of school in the 9th grade as a straight A student and joined the army. They tried to kill me almost immediately when I got in the army. I signed up for OCS. They wouldn't let me in OCS. I said, wait a minute. What's the deal on that, man? I've never failed a test in my life. Why would I not get OCS? Oh, you didn't fail a test. You scored so high on the test, they won't let you be an officer. Anyone with your IQ will question orders. And Smedley Butler tried to tell us that. He upset one of the fascist schemes to take over this country a little bit early. And he said, war's a racket. War's a racket here. And they you suddenly didn't hear much more about Smedley Butler. He was, and they're still doing the same thing today. Any officer, general, colonel that's standing up for the Constitution, that's standing up for the people of this country, not the corporations that run things, is being demonized, demoted. Obama's even taken out about 100 officers that were working in the nuclear program. They're trying to set us up for that third world war. They want it against the Muslims. Again, the bankers fund both sides of every conflict. And if we don't have an enemy strong enough, they'll create one. That's what they did with the Soviet Union. Made the Russian people, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. The Russians ain't coming. They don't care. It's the divide and conquer. This is what they do. And Smedley Butler told you about that.
Well, one of the guys in American history that has really been placed up on a pedestal isn't Smedley Butler, but it's Douglas MacArthur. Now, you know what happened as far as the
Bonus Army?
The Bonus Army. Would you tell them about how this wonderful patriot, how he responded to these military veterans of World War I who were denied the bonuses that they had been promised? As a result of that, they gathered and had a protest, and at the protest, tell the folks what this wonderful American general did to those veterans, those honorable veterans.
He went in, he brought the troops in, they burned them out of Washington. He ran them down with horses. They had the cavalry come in. They shot a lot of them. They took them out. MacArthur, and of course there was MacArthur's aide that was right there with him. That was Eisenhower, who hated Germans, and later on in World War II committed so many atrocities on the Germans that he should have been hung in Nuremberg.
Well, frankly, one of the stories about Eisenhower that I think most people aren't aware of is the fact that in Germany there were a lot of people who had moved and had defected from the Soviet Union. They were called the White Russians, and there were literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, that had left Russia and had moved into Germany. And they moved there simply because of the fact that they were totally opposed to Lenin and his ideas of communism. And when Eisenhower got to Germany, he, against international law, repatriated. He sent all of those men and women and children that had left Russia. He sent them back to Russia in cattle cars, and they were all assassinated by the Russian government. Literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of white Russians were killed as a result of Dwight D. Eisenhower's betrayal. He broke international law, and frankly, he was every bit as guilty of more crimes, as was Herman Goering. So, you know, I think that we, the American people, are just not given true information.
No, we're not, and you're right about that. The only thing I can say for Eisenhower is that he did give you a little bit of truth when he talked about the.
Really going on.
Hang on, we'll be right back.
That mainstream
Station
media
break.
won't tell you. Are you frustrated with your elected politicians? Get the news behind the news at truthradio.com. At Truth Radio, you can listen live or listen to a large selection of archived programs on demand. Listen when you want to. Truthradio.com. The truth is out there. All you have to do is open your mind and listen.
That's right, and I am broadcasting on Truth Radio again. I've been doing that off and on for over 20 years. I finally got a little bit of money in, so I could afford to get back on. So we're up on Truth Radio. We're on TalkStream Live, and didn't get on Crusade today. Don't know quite what happened with Crusade, but all of these shows, this show, and all of my other shows are archived at freeamerican.com, blogtalkradio.com, Clay Douglas. And this is a, you know, folks, the information you're getting to hear today is the truth. It is absolutely the truth. And Keith, for this, we're working on our second hour now. Keith Broaders is my guest today. And he's got the Constitution Club. I've got all the links to the Constitution Club up on my site. They'll be there permanently. And I don't take advertising. Nobody pays me for advertising. The advertising I put up on the Free American is for products that do what they say they'll do. I've got products up there from tents to water filters that will filter out the fluoride, filter out the radioactivity and the chemtrails content in your water. And I've got my books, and I've got the magazine, Free American Magazine. Keith's written for it. We've got his articles in it. And I will have ads for the Constitution Club in every issue from now on. It's you can't get the truth. You can't get this kind of take on mainstream media. And you can't even get it on most of your so-called patriot stations. You know, some of the patriot stations have gone down because they were making meth in the back room. And don't know what all of them are doing, but most of them won't even have me on here. They won't broadcast this show. They won't let you hear the truth. They're controlled by their advertisers. I don't take advertising. The only thing that keeps me on air is you. You make a donation. You can go to freeamerican.com, click on any of the donate buttons, and make a donation. Or you can go to shop.freeamerican.com and buy some of my magazine. Now, keep in mind, man, I've sold these Free American magazines I started 20 years ago. For 10 years, I put them in every bookstore out there, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, K Street Newsstand, and the newsstands in Hollywood. And they tried to take me out. They tried to silence me. They tried to kill the Free American. Well, this Free American's a little hard to kill. And now I have the magazine back, and it's better than it ever was. You got links to all of these sites, all of the information, everything. Don't believe nothing I tell you, folks. Check it out for yourself. Read my magazine. Read what the people are trying to tell you. Read to people like Keith Broaders that are trying to do something. Hook up with their organizations. And that's what I want to talk about, Keith. Your organization. You've got an organization that started here.
Well, let me explain. First off, this organization is not a traditional group by any stretch of the imagination. The Constitution Club was created not to be a group because we don't have a very specific agenda like a lot of groups do. For example, if there's a group called End the Fed, and they have a very specific agenda. You have another group called Oath Keepers, and they have a very specific agenda. You have all of these different groups, and they all have They all have an issue that they're primarily focusing on. Well, the goal of the Constitution Club is to create a coalition of many groups. In other words, when people come to the Constitution Club, they're not joining a group or a club per se. What they're really doing is they're coming together with like-minded American liberty-minded patriots to form a broad coalition. Essentially, the only statements that we basically post as essentially our foundation is the fact that if you believe in liberty, individual liberty, and personal responsibility, you are welcome to become a part of the Constitution Club. We basically don't care if your eyes are brown or blue. We don't care if you're tall or short. We don't care if you're a Lutheran or a Baptist. We don't care essentially virtually anything. This is a place where you can go. This is essentially a forum on the internet. It's kind of like a Facebook type of a page, but it's designed to be used by people who love liberty, people who are willing to stand up and speak up and take the steps necessary to restore our nation to its rightful position. So as a part of this program, we have the overall network, which is called the Constitution Club. Then beneath the Constitution Club, we have individual websites that have been created for every county in America. We have 3,142 different websites that basically are hosted by the Constitution Club. So when you join the Constitution Club, you then go to the county where you live. You join your county group. Now you have an opportunity to unite with like-minded people in your local community. This is a place where you can go to discuss issues, where you can hold elected officials accountable.
All right, let me try this for a second here. Hello, who's calling me from the 528 area code? 428. 458. I'm sorry. Who are you? All right. Then try calling back later when I'm off the air. All right. Sorry about that.
No problem. So basically, the Constitution Club essentially then is a union of like-minded patriots that believe in the principles of liberty and believe in the vision of the Founding Fathers. We are people who, like I said, we've created these local websites. We want to we'd like to get, frankly, as soon as possible, we'd like to get 25 individuals virtually in every county in the country. Well, you take 3,000 counties and you multiply that by 25 people, now you're talking about literally tens of thousands of members. And we want to create essentially the equivalency of a grand jury for the counties, but we also want to create something that we call a oversight committee. In Colorado, in Archuleta County, Colorado, they call it the County Guard. Essentially, it's a group of individuals at the county level that are bound and determined to hold their elected officials' feet to the fire. They're going to be attending the meetings of the city councils, the meetings of the school boards, the meeting of the county boards of supervisors, or the county commissioners. And they're going to be sitting in the front row with their yellow legal pads, and they're going to be taking notes, and they are going to be prepared to issue criminal complaints when the elected officials cross the line. We have to hold elected officials accountable, and we need to do it at the local level.
Yes, sir.
And that's what we're all about. I'd like to encourage people to go to www.constitutionclubusa.com. Join our group. We're going to be, by the end of this week, we'll have 3,300 members around the country, but we need to have 3,300 members in each state if we're going to really make a difference, because frankly, even the hungriest lion on the planet can't eat an elephant by himself, but you get an army of ants sufficiently large and they can eat the elephant in a matter of a few minutes. And so we need to bring more and more like-minded people into the fold. We need to educate, motivate, and we need to get our boots on the ground.
Let me tell you, folks, what he's saying is the absolute truth. I can tell you from personal experience. I owned the north half of a little two-house town in New Mexico called Bingham, New Mexico for many years. And suddenly Socorro County decided they wanted to put meters on our wells, and they wanted to get zoning in on these ranches. I lived 30 miles from Socorro. I drove into town for the county meeting, and I said, "What communist try to put this kind of law, this zoning law in? You want to come out to my area here and tell the ranchers who've been there for 100 years what they can do on their own property? What are you trying to do? Get somebody killed? You wanna come out and put a meter on my well? You will get somebody killed. If you put your foot on my property to try to do something to my water supply, I'll be the first one to shoot you. And we got the county commissioners withdrew that whole proposal for zoning. So I'm just one person. You can make a difference here. And I'm going to have J.B. Campbell on this next week. He talks about the American Defense Party and the fact that we don't really need these political parties. Republicans and Democrats are really the exact opposite of what we're supposed to have here. He talks about a 3-part plan to dismantle the police state and prevent martial laws. The first part is a neighborhood watch. The second part is a civilian police review board. And the third part is bring the military into the resistance. And when you sit and you look and you start studying and you see what they're doing to our veterans, all the way from Vietnam, when they sprayed us with Agent Orange, to Iraq, here, son, take this ammunition. You can blow up that tank over there and kill a bunch of Iraqis and the children that are around that pick up the depleted uranium around there. But you know, they just don't tell you that it's going to kill your children when you get back home. You're going to this pollution. They're killing Agent Orange, supplied by Monsanto, has taken the lives of a lot of my fellow Vietnam era vets. They're killing and they've tried to point the whole Homeland Security assessment that I've got in my book, Mystery Babylon, The New World Order Unveiled. This assessment, they tried to demonize the militia, they tried to demonize Christians, they tried to demonize veterans. Oh, they could be a danger to us. My ass. They're trying to drug the veterans. They're trying to stop this whole freedom movement any way they can.
You know, Clayton, one of the things that concerns me is the fact is that we need to recognize things for what they are. You know, back in the days of the American Revolution, the people of this nation had a lot of contempt for the Prussians, who were basically paid mercenaries who came in. And my question is, and I know this will offend a lot of people, but what is a mercenary? Isn't a mercenary someone who is a soldier for compensation?
Yes.
I think that a lot of the people that are basically going into the military today essentially are somewhat like mercenaries. I mean, they are paid to basically go around the world and impose the will of the corporations, not the will of the people. I mean, I don't think that there's virtually anybody that I know that really favors the idea that we're going to send drones and strike at the children living in Pakistan. I don't think that's the will of the people. I think that's the will of the corporations who are trying to control the resources and the monetary situation around the world. So I think we do such a great job recruiting people into the military, and unfortunately they're swallowing a lot of the line, hook, line, and sinker. There's no reason for us to be. The Constitution says that one of the main roles of the Constitution is to defend the nation. It's not to be an aggressive force. It's not to be the international police force. We have over, 500 or 700 military bases all over the world where we basically are on their land. Are we really there to protect the people, or are we really there to protect the interests of the American banking institutions and the corporations in those particular nations? We have people all around the world. No wonder the American government is hated. I don't think the American people are hated around the world, but I think our government is. And we, the people, are responsible for the actions of our government. And so if we don't like the things that the government is doing, then it's our responsibility to do something about it. And I think number one is we should have one big giant congressional enema, and we should basically get rid of all of that human debris that is on Capitol Hill that has been violating the Constitution on a regular basis. on my website, there's a link from the John Birch Society. They have a thing called the New American, and on that link, you can go to any congressional representative and you can check on his voting record, and you can see that the vast majority of the people in Congress, on the average, 50% of the time, they vote for things which are unconstitutional. You can see exactly what your particular congressman's ranking is. What percentage of the time does he honor his oath, and which percentage of the time does he violate the Constitution? And take that information, write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and say, ladies and gentlemen of this particular county, I would like to make this announcement that our illustrious congressman 37% of the time voted to honor his oath, and 63% of the time he voted to side with the United Nations and basically sold out our Constitution. We need to expose these rats for who they truly are. We've got to stop trying to kiss up to them and call them your honorable this. They're not that. They're not honorable. They are the disgusting, the dishonorable, the disreputable. We need again to recognize the enemy and to realize these people have basically sold out. They've sold out to the bankers so that they can get reelected. The only difference between the mafia and the modern day politicians is that the modern day politicians are elected. That's the only difference.
Yeah, I've said there's a few things I can't tell you. I can't tell you if the government took over the mafia or if the mafia took over the government. But it's a criminal organization. These congressmen are supporting the bankers. They are your enemy right now. And the soldier, what we have to do, and one of the things that I'm trying to do is organize the veterans to put their skills to use. They've been trained. They took an oath to defend the Constitution, and they don't need to be in Iraq. They don't need to be in Afghanistan. They don't need to be in North Korea or South Korea. They don't need, and we didn't need to be in Vietnam. There was no reason to bomb those Vietnamese, to kill all the Vietnamese. They were never a threat to this country. The bankers are more of a threat to this country than any foreign country out there. And we, because we're working for the bankers, because the bankers are using our military to basically go and do the same thing that they did with England, the empire on which the sun never sets. We've replaced England. We've been drafted by England. It's not. It's not the way it's supposed to be. There was not supposed to be a standing army in this country. Now, what I would like to do, one of the projects that I'm working on, is to restore the basis of every civilization. Keith, is the self-sufficient family farm. And one of the things that you'll find if you read the Free American, if you listen to this show, is that they've been going after the self-sufficient family farm for 100 years. They want to underwrite it. They want to tell you what you can grow, when you can grow it, how you can grow it. They've stolen our #1 cash crop. I mean, 100 years ago, you could pay your taxes with hemp. And today you can't even grow it if you're a farmer. They've taken away your #1 cash crop by calling it marijuana. A lot more, it's a hell of a lot more than marijuana. And if one of the plans we've got is to build self-sufficient homes. This is a home made out of concrete that doesn't leak energy. So you don't have and it's got solar on the roof, so you don't have to pay out that $150 to $200 a month energy bill. You know, they're lying to you all the time. Oh, we want a green America. His idea, the government's idea of greening America is to sell the top of that mountain or that field out there to a foreign company so they can put up windmills, generate electricity, send it back down to the power company so they can charge you more for green energy. Why not put it on your roof? This is what we're proposing right now. Use the veterans to build these homes with the water storage and the basement with the garden on the roof, and above the garden you've got solar panels that'll power the whole home. They don't want that. They don't want that, so they're trying. Right up in Arlington, Texas, we had some people. You know, I've had this in my magazine for the last few months. You know, grow food, not grass in your backyard. Grow food, and if you put solar on your roof and you grow food in your backyard, then you don't need the government for nothing. This is the way we existed. This is what the South was like before the Civil War. They want to destroy that independence. They want to destroy your independence. They don't want you thinking of self-sufficiency. They want you buying that genetically modified food that rats won't eat from your grocery store, made by Monsanto, whose motto is, you know, no food we don't own. Again, that's an attack on the farmers. And, you know, the only thing I have a real difficulty with, Keith, is trying to differentiate the difference between communism and fascism. I think it's two wings of the same bird, the same as the Republicans and the Democrats.
No, I think that's probably a pretty accurate statement. Let me ask you something in regards to this. There's been a General Valley and this Harry Riley have been talking about having this big march on Washington in May, and I don't know what your opinion is. In fact, I'd kind of like to get your opinion as to whether or not you think that this is something that will hurt or harm Obama in the pursuit of his agenda.
Well, we had a million of my motorcycle riding brothers that descended on Washington. I said the only mistake they made was not staying there and arresting all of the congressmen and the president. As far as I'm concerned, the president's a traitor. He's working for either the Saudis or the Jews. He's a perfect New World Order leader. I mean, he's black, he's white, he's Muslim, he's Christian, he's Jewish. He's an
illegal alien.
Illegal alien, yes, sir. Absolutely. He got no right to be a president. He was put in. So your Democratic and your Republican parties didn't dwell on that, didn't touch on that, didn't talk about that in the last election. That means all of those congressmen, or at least 90% of them, are traitors to this country. Now, I would like to see this march. I would like to see 1 million Americans descend on Washington, D.C., and not leave until they had these people in hand irons, in chains, in jails, and tried. And I believe we've got, if we instituted just 12 men, a jury, I believe between you and I, between the resources that we've got and the information that we've got, we could prove to any 12 jury of their peers that these people are criminals, that these bankers are criminals, these dual citizens are criminals, and the people that are supporting them in Congress are traitors. I think we could prove that. So, but I also, the possibility is that they're setting us up the same way the bonus army were set up, so they can bring the troops in, so they can come in and kill a bunch of Americans. And if you think they won't kill a bunch of Americans, they'll do that. And just the same as the Zionists sacrificed all of the Jews and all of the Russians at the end of during the World War II. They killed over 60 million